naturalness in us greets the naturalness in you. So this is quite a huge topic we touch on tonight. And of course, we'll just be touching on it, opening it up. Because when we talk about naturalness, we're talking about true nature. We're talking about the direct and spontaneous presence of all the non-dual qualities, of all the non-dual qualities, and the source of it all beyond that. All of the qualities of ourselves. So we're talking about unconditional peace, spontaneous, unfiltered, uncensored love. Not love which is all warm and sticky, but love that just is because it is, because it is. We're talking about passion and freedom that are able to move as they move, without editing, without interference. We're talking in the most simple sense of being free to be whatever we are in any moment. So we're talking about the freedom or opening of the whole dimension of being, to be as we are. And it's very beautiful because being is immensely alive. We are being, our being is becoming and becoming and becoming and becoming at a vibration which is way beyond the personality, or way beyond our social forms and norms, and way beyond what it was the moment before, or way beyond the expectation of what it will be in the next moment. It's here now, alive. So that's where we come from, being to this quality of naturalness, because it's not a static, fixed thing. It's something which flows like a river or burns like a volcano, or that can rain down torrentially, or that can move in a different kind of time like a mountain. It's something which has, in a way, all the qualities of nature within it, without contradiction, without need for everything to be the same, that the mountain must be like the river, which must be like the sun, which must be like a tree. There's no need for that. It's this multiplicity of happening, timelessly shining like a sun. And we can never get rid of it. This is really close to what we are, that we are, that we are. The I amness, which might, as it moves into the visible world, take on a unique form. But at its source is the same one in me, in you, in a tree, everywhere where there is presence of being. In the ocean, in the cat, the same being. And not in a uniform way, but in a very, very full way, which the mind can hardly grasp. And unfortunately, the mind would like to grasp it. And the mind has a habit of grasping or ignoring or distracting or amusing itself elsewhere. Partly because when we fall into this space of being and the flow of naturalness, we are taken over by ourselves. We surrender to ourselves, which shouldn't be that scary, but somehow is, to the dimension of mind which is hardwired to our fear reflexes. because the mind can't control it. It can't contain it. And the mind, and when I say the mind, I don't mean the great big open mind, which will reflect being like the reflection of moonlight on the water. Not that mind. I'm talking about the programming of a binary mind that wants to control, that wants to create, that wants to protect, that feels that it has to survive being alive somehow, which fears its own death, its own demise, which comes in the form of losing control over reality. So partly what happens when we talk about this dimension of naturalness, the dimension of being, and you contact it and you go into this I amness, this presence, just this silent resting, being nobody, just being here now. And then I suggest that this is there in another person, in this one, in that one, in the guy that works at the supermarket, in the postman, in the horse, in the shark, in a spider, in a cockroach. It begins to kind of get abstracted, like it's abstract, because the mind picks it up and says, yeah, my enemy, that one, those kind of people, that kind of creature, or this kind of evil, this is separate from this being. And it starts to put conditions on your being here as one, your wholeness. And it thinks it's protecting you, but actually it's excluding you from yourself. It's pulling out and making this whole talk abstract. Yeah, she's talking about being and I amness and everything, but in the end of the day, real life, in the real world, that's good for nothing. That's not going to put bread on the table. That's not going to hold the family together. This principle, this experience of unity, what is that good for? How is that going to save the children from each other? And it's a program. It's a program based on fear and loss of control, the fear of losing control and the control reflex that comes about when we feel unsafe. And this little part of our mind is doing its best to survive because of history. History of pain, history of suffering, where it failed to protect the whole from the experience of pain or loss or suffering. So it's driven by fear, this software. Fear.com. That's its algorithm. Be afraid, be afraid, be afraid, and divide and conquer and be afraid. It's a little bit like a psychopathic government. Be afraid, it says to the whole kingdom of life. And let's divide and conquer. Let's make them fight each other. Because this wholeness is very, very, very threatening, because the wholeness is something that cannot be controlled. And what is wholeness from the point of view of our pure consciousness when we look at wholeness? Wholeness must include our feeling, our felt sense, the feeling of love, the feeling of peace, the things we really care about, the feeling of care, the feeling of freedom, our naturalness. And it must include our physical body. When our body feels good and when our body feels less good, when our body smells something and says that's stinky, and when our body smells something and says that's yummy. It has to include this. Otherwise, we are dividing and fragmenting inside ourselves. When the belly and the legs and the knees says, I'm really attracted to this person. And the mind interferes with that and says, no, you can't do that because of this and because of that, because of that. You cannot feel what you feel, so unfeel what you feel. Numb down the sense of attraction. Because if you go with that, you'll start destroying stuff and you'll get into trouble and we'll get entangled and it will be all kinds of trouble and you'll hurt others, which means that you'll get hurt and then you'll be blamed and then you'll be guilty. So don't feel that appreciation from the body towards another human being. Divide, fragment, conquer, bully. And we didn't even leave our own sphere. We didn't even talk about each other. We are just within our own field of experience now. So partly we do this, we divide from our physical sensations, our physical likes and dislikes, our physical longings, our physical reflexes, our emotional body, our anger, even from our fear, we divide from it, because while the mind's acting on fear, it doesn't own it. It says, never be afraid, never be afraid, never be afraid. Like these characters who are so strong and so above, who are never afraid, who are basically under the water, terrified, so afraid they don't even know it yet, so deeply gone into control and arrogance and mental form. So these splits that are created, they really obstruct our enjoyment of the quality of naturalness. They disrupt our access to the dimension of what we really are, our true nature, the dimension of where we feel ourselves to be here, our being, as we are. It's not abstract at all. Everything is spinning around this sense of being you. It's not a sense of self like, here I am out here and let's have a sense myself fragmented out here, although sometimes in trauma it can show up like that, or here's myself and let me tweak myself and perfect myself and present myself. We can do all of that monkey business, but this is the real thing, that place without identity where we go into what it feels like to be alive. Not the experience of being alive, but being here alive. There's a timeless quality to it. It's a central doorway to everything, in a way, to quality. Before there is interference, before there's fragmentation, before there's division through all of these personality games, partly whipped up by this circus master, which is the mind of duality, the mind based on avoiding suffering. So the only way that this programming would set up in the mind of having to avoid suffering no matter what, even if it means sacrificing being ourselves, being naturally as we are, being truthfully who and what and where we are in any moment. The only way that we could anticipate this suffering is because it happened in the past. It has been felt in the past, this suffering, this core existential fear, or this deep dread, or this deep horrible sense of loss, or this glimpse of what it could be like to be isolated in an absent universe. We would not be able to fear this even unconsciously if we hadn't already experienced it. We wouldn't be able to fear it if we hadn't already experienced it in the past. It's impossible to fear something that we don't actually know what it is. It's impossible to imagine something without an energetic background to the imagination. So it's based on trauma. It's based on trauma which, through shock, like the shock of loss, or a shock of pain, or a simple electric shock, or a shock of something unexpected happening, awoke us and implanted this energy in such a way that the mind will not forget it, and somehow decides in the ejection out of form, never, never, never again to feel this, and yet is still feeling it. And never to be shocked by this feeling again. So better to expect it. And there's care behind it. There's a kind of protective reflex about it. You know, if you've been shocked once when you were happy and relaxed, then that shock in that openness and vulnerability of your true being, it's not something you want to repeat. So then it's better not to be happy and relaxed, because then the shock is so terrible. It's like the same principle that we have when we say, okay, don't expect anything good to be happen, because the disappointment is unbearable. So don't expect anything positive. Because if you don't expect it, maybe you'll be pleasantly surprised. And at least you won't be shocked by the devastation of not getting what you expected, by the disappointment. Traumatic programming. And that example can so often lead to like a loss of vision completely, a kind of dark growing cynicism where we don't expect anything good to ever happen. We don't wait for our true nature to show up. We don't expect to be loved. We don't expect to be happy because we might be disappointed. So we basically close the door down. And maybe somewhere from out there, we might be pleasantly surprised one day by a moment of happiness. But we come to a position where we can be bombarded with the Archangel Gabriel shedding happiness all over us, and we're so deeply not expecting it anymore that we've closed down all the doorways of the heart and we don't actually notice. Oh, it's a bright sunlight coming into the living room this evening. It's getting in my eyes. You know, we close down the possibility of even receiving the blessings of being alive or becoming aware of them. We numb them down. We dumb them down. So these dynamics of trauma and shock are interfering with our naturalness, which means that the pathway back to naturalness, it doesn't have to involve in the first instance deep trauma work or revisiting our most painful memories or digging up the horrors of our ancestors. But there's no reason why it shouldn't. But it does involve opening up again the possibility of wholeness, meaning the windows of perception from the mind, just being alive without necessarily having to identify or with anything, or to having to grasp and say, I am this or I am that, and moving out of the story into an openness of mind. And from there, moving into an openness of heart, this area of just being. Not that it has to be loving or pleasant. Maybe when we move into this dimension of being, we just feel a kind of numbness or a depressed vibration or a kind of sense of no point going here, senselessness. But be with it anyway, like a cat or an animal, to be with what is there. And then moving again, this is a downward flow of naturalness, like a waterfall, into the body. And being with whatever is moving in terms of physical sensation in the here and now through the body. And in opening up these three windows of thought, no mind, no thought, even just for moments, even noticing the no thought which is behind a thought, feeling, open, boundless space in which feelings occur without grasping or pushing away, just opening up the space on the inside and physical sensation. Not grasping at a physical sensation or saying, I don't want this one and I want this one, and judging it and commentating on it and tracking it, just letting it be the miracle of sensation that it is within the spacious quietness of our being, then an alignment begins to happen, an alignment of openness where there is no longer a conflict between fragments of ourselves, between dimensions of ourselves, meaning we shift dimension to a place where we can't be traumatized, where we can't be broken, where division isn't actually possible. The alignment, the cessation of the conflict, because we align just with our consciousness, allows the consciousness to include what we anyway are, which is this spacious dimension on the inside, where everything has a chance to restore. And that's partly what we're talking about on these Wednesday evenings, the restorative power of these qualities. So now, for example, with love, the quality of love, we can shift from a position where we fear feeling love because we will experience loss, or we blame love for our suffering, or we don't trust love because it brings trouble, it brings pain. So we shift from such a mind-based, traumatized, shocked relationship with that aspect of our being to a sober kind of realization that we're kind of made of love anyway, and the love is here irrespective. And the love is available as a resource to the suffering and beyond the suffering. And the kind of mental realization as well that actually it's better to love and suffer than just to suffer. It's better to feel freedom, even in conditions of slavery, than to shut down on the freedom and be only enslaved. It's better to experience well-being and suffer sometimes than to give up on well-being completely because we blamed it for our suffering, and to have the suffering anyway. It's more worthwhile. There's a shift that can happen where the very resource that we blame for our suffering now can be a salve for that suffering and becomes free in naturalness to show up through us unconditionally to whatever form or experience we're in that moment. Meaning we can experience peace on a battlefield. We can experience freedom within a jail or within conditions of restriction. We can experience passion even if we are not able to move. This excitement, this hunger for life. Something unconditional from the unconditional, deeper dimension of ourselves can open up. And then there can come a place where we get a little bit confused. Because it could be that naturalness is just being whatever I am, and you should just accept who I am because this is my naturalness. And if I let myself be natural, I'm a bit of a waste of space. I'm actually dysfunctional, angry, depressed, a little bit stupid, awkward, talk too fast. My naturalness is rubbish. Why would I let myself be free? Because if I go with naturalness, then all of this kind of unwelcome expressions of myself are going to show up in the world. And I will be rejected inevitably, which confirms that I cannot be natural. And this scream of pain will come forward. I'm not allowed to be angry. I'm not allowed to be afraid. I'm not allowed to be depressed. It's impossible to be me. And it's not allowed to feel that it's impossible to be me because that's kind of selfish. And I'm not allowed to be selfish. Which means, bottom line is, I'm not allowed to be me. I'm not allowed to be natural. And slowly this cry of the pain of manifesting begins to bring us into itself. The suffering begins to again pull us in. We give up on the naturalness and the mind says, okay, I told you. Naturalness, no good for us. Let me take care of the heart and the body and the neighbor, and I will work out a winning strategy to survive all of this traumatic, horrible life. It's tricky, and we are in an evolution, and part of that evolution involves the understanding of the healing of trauma. And that means that we really need to be able to resource everything which is beyond the mind, which is in the here and now, the present moment. Because there are deep belief structures saying that if I'm natural, for example, with my anger, and I allow my anger, I will immediately hurt somebody and I will immediately be rejected. So I'm not going to even acknowledge, even for a moment, this warmth in my belly, which is basically trying to align the whole system. Because I'll be stuck in it forever. The slow down mind is saying it's a trap, it's a prison. But the moment we come into the here and now of being, there is this spaciousness, which means we can naturally feel anger, we can naturally feel unnatural even. But there is a space for it to unfold, to be in such a way that it doesn't exclude our care. It doesn't exclude our love for our fellow man. It doesn't exclude our tenderness as well. We can be angry and care for somebody at the same time. We can be in pain and love at the same time. We can feel awkward and feel compassion at the same time. And immediately you begin to get a sense. So our awkwardness is going to stop us being compassionate towards another human being. Who cares about our awkwardness? Let the awkwardness be there. It can be whatever it is. The compassion is the important thing. Sense of truth, the expression of true nature. This is more important than the reflection or the feedback or the rejection that might come from the environment, from that software of suffering. So what comes forward in naturalness, if we let it, can be the inclusion of true nature in the here and now in such a way that we begin to expand in a quicker vibration, a vibration which is more in alignment with our being, beyond the beliefs, meaning even our emotions are allowed to be natural, because the mind doesn't interfere and say, oh, I'm angry because of this, or I'm guilty because of this, or I'm not free because, and I should do this and I should do that, which is the real place where the naturalness gets disrupted. And maybe what comes forward in our naturalness is an old pain of feeling we are not free to be here in naturalness. So the way to Rome begins with the steps and the pathway from which we left Rome. This is the pathway which, with our presence and our being and our open-heartedness, which will lead us back to a sense of wholeness, a permission to be. There is pain there. It's not a reason not to be, and it's an impotent pain because it cannot ultimately stop us being what we are. And the way back is sometimes moving a little bit like through a bardo state, through these places of pain, these places, these echoes of suffering, which are around this basic freedom to be here. But that's how important it is. This is what we're talking about, aligning with the fact of our own being. It's actually inevitable that we return to the direct expression of our naturalness and freedom of being. The only question is how much we suffer in coming there. So what we hope with this working with things quality by quality, and sometimes touching in the pure sense of naturalness and pure quality, which is inside ourselves, which is out there in nature, which is within each other, in touching in again and again through many, many different pathways to this dimension, we open up the freedom to be here as you are, and the freedom to heal through whatever is showing up in a moment without excluding a thing. The freedom to suffer without suffering, hijacking consciousness and defining you. The freedom to feel bad without being caught by the belief that because I feel bad, that means I am bad. How do we get that belief? That because we have a feeling that is what we are. I can sense evil. It doesn't mean I am evil. I can feel absolutely worthless. It doesn't mean I am worthless. It's a vibration. It's something I'm able to feel. Do you notice the space that opens up? And when we give a permission, the whole vibration increases into the here and now, here and now, here and now, here and now. So often when we give permission, for example, to anger, okay, there is anger here. Let's allow this anger. We look for it and it's gone. So where did it go? Where did the anger go? I was all ready to feel my anger and receive it. And suddenly I'm quiet like a midnight lake. It's purely still. Why is that? Partly because a lot of the stress and a lot of the conflict and a lot of the fight and a lot of the distortion on our naturalness is coming about because we don't give ourselves permission to be as we are in this moment. Because we get caught in these belief structures that tell us that if we risk being as we are in this moment, we could lose everything, which is a little bit absurd when you reflect on it, and also untrue.